The restaurant was the kind of place where the lighting never told the truth. Warm amber. Candle flame. The careful architecture of elegance designed to make everyone look softer than they were. Victoria Harmon stood just inside the entrance. One hand holding a champagne flute she had no intention of finishing, the other pressed flat against her hip, a posture her assistant once described as professionally unapproachable. She had taken it as a compliment. The contract signing had gone well. Her legal team had outmaneuvered Castlewood Group on 3 critical clauses. The CFO had shaken her hand with the stiff admiration of someone who had underestimated her. And the evening should have felt like a victory. Should have. Instead, she stood at the edge of the dining room and felt nothing, the particular nothing she had grown fluent in over the past 5 years. The kind that settled behind her sternum like a stone. She was scanning for her PR director, threading her gaze through the sea of expensive suits and overworked smiles, when she stopped, completely stopped. Herr Champagne tilde, because across the room, at a corner table draped in white linen, was a man she had not allowed herself to think about in a very long time. Older now, but somehow gentler. He was leaning slightly forward, elbows on the table, smiling at the woman across from him, a warm, easy smile, the kind that had once made Victoria feel like she was the only person in a room. She watched him reach over and say something that made the woman laugh. Something cold moved through her chest. She didn't move. She didn't leave. She stood there with her champagne tilting in her hand, and for the first time in years, Victoria Harmon had absolutely no idea what to do. She had a driver now. She hadn't always. Victoria remembered the exact year she had stopped taking the subway, not because she'd forgotten how, but because the moment she stepped onto the platform in her first real coat, a woman with a stroller had looked at her with a kind of tired recognition and said, "Long day?" And Victoria had felt something unhinge in her chest that she hadn't wanted to examine. She was 38. The Forbes profile from the previous spring had called her surgical in the boardroom and opaque everywhere else, a line her publicist wanted removed. And Victoria had insisted they keep. Opacity was useful. Opacity was professional armor, worn so long it had fused with skin. She ran Harmon and Cole acquisitions. Not ran lead, her communications director always corrected, because ran implied maintenance, and Victoria transformed. 43 employees when she inherited the firm at 32. 219 now. 4 international offices. A pending merger with a European logistics group that had kept her in conference rooms until midnight for the better part of 6 months. The magazines liked the narrative. Woman builds empire. They used photographs where she was always standing, always in motion, always looking slightly past the camera toward something more important than the present moment. What they didn't photograph, the 3 a.m. ceiling, the way she moved through her apartment glass and steel, 41st floor. Impeccable, and felt the silence as something physical. The refrigerator that contained exactly 3 things, sparkling water, leftover takeout, and a bottle of wine she opened once a week and closed after a single glass. She had been engaged twice. Both men had been appropriate. Educated, ambitious, socially calibrated. The first had ended the engagement after 8 months, citing something about emotional unavailability in a tone that suggested he'd rehearsed it. The second she had ended herself, in the middle of a Tuesday breakfast, looking at his face across the table and realizing she felt more alone with him than without him. Her therapist, she saw one, every 3rd Thursday, which was the most she had been able to commit to, had once said, "I think you're waiting for something to feel the way it felt before." Victoria had let that sit in the air without answering, because the answer was yes, and the answer frightened her. The evening of the contract signing had not been planned as anything more than an obligation. Castlewood had chosen the venue Ardoise, on the 47th floor of the Meridian building, and Victoria had arrived 7 minutes late on purpose, because punctuality in negotiations was a form of eagerness, and she had learned early not to appear eager. The dinner was competent. The wine was good. The conversation afterward, when the contracts were signed and the photographs taken, had the quality of all such conversations. Important. Sounding. Immediately forgettable. She had excused herself with the intention of finding her PR director, Cassandra Webb, who had texted twice about a comment she needed Victoria to approve before the morning wire. Instead, she had stopped at the edge of the dining room and felt her entire body go still. She had not seen Nathan Calloway in 5 years, 3 months, and some number of days she was not going to count. He looked the same in the ways that mattered. Dark hair. A little more silver at the temples now. The same quiet set of his shoulders, not tense, never tense. That particular stillness that had once made her feel inexplicably calm. He was wearing a sport coat over a simple button-down, no tie, which meant he had made an effort without pretending the effort was effortless, and that small detail hit her somewhere unguarded. He was smiling. She had forgotten how much she missed his smile, and then she looked at the woman across from him, young, bright-faced, leaning in close, and the thing she had been pretending not to feel for 5 years assembled itself into something sharp and immediate. Here champagne, Tilde. 5 years ago, she was not yet who she was now. She had been climbing hard, fast, with the particular focus of someone who had grown up watching other people have things she wanted and had decided early that wanting was not enough. You had to move. You had to be willing to sacrifice the comfortable thing for the correct thing. Again and again. Until sacrifice became reflex. She had been 33, director of development, not yet CEO, burning through 60-hour weeks and Saturday mornings, and the particular loneliness of being the most prepared person in every room she entered. She had met Nathan Calloway on a Wednesday, not at a function, not at a curated networking event or an industry dinner, or the kind of careful social situation her life had become. She had met him at a coffee shop 3 blocks from her office, a small, unglamorous place, with mismatched chairs and a barista who spelled her name wrong on the cup despite her correcting him every single morning because the espresso machine in her office building had broken and she had refused to drink the instant alternative her assistant offered. Nathan had been at the table beside her. A paper spread open in front of him. A coffee he wasn't drinking. His daughter, 6 years old, Victoria would later learn, with the most serious expression she had ever seen on a child, that Small was sitting beside him coloring in a notebook, her tongue pressed to her upper lip in concentration. He hadn't spoken to her first. That was what she remembered. He had noticed her looking at the child and smiled, the way parents do when someone sees their kid, and gone back to his paper. She had spoken first. She still wasn't entirely sure why. What's she drawing? He had leaned over and looked. Looks like a horse, or possibly a city. The little girl Lily had looked up with enormous solemn eyes and said, "It's both." That was it. That was how it began. His name was Nathan Calloway. He owned a garage on the west side, Calloway & Sons, though he was the only son and the business had been his father's before it became his. He had taken it over at 26 when his father's health declined, and kept it running while finishing a degree part-time and raising Lily alone after her mother left when Lily was 18 months old. He said this without self-pity. That was what struck Victoria first. The complete absence of performance in how he described his life. No bid for sympathy. No careful framing. Just, this is what happened, this is what I did. She had grown so fluent in performance, had spent years in rooms where everyone was simultaneously revealing and concealing, that his plainness felt almost strange. Like a frequency she had forgotten how to hear. They had coffee for 2 hours that first morning. The barista spelled her name wrong again. She didn't correct him. What followed was 4 months that Victoria had spent the subsequent 5 years trying and failing to replace. He cooked on Sunday evenings, nothing elaborate, pasta mostly, sometimes soup, and she would sit on a stool at his kitchen counter and talk while he moved around the stove, with a quiet competence that she found unexpectedly soothing. Lily would sit beside her with her notebook, narrating the drawings as she made them. The horse city evolved into an entire landscape with a castle and a river, and a small figure she identified as the explorer, though the explorer's features varied week to week. He listened without agenda. That was the thing she kept returning to. She had spent so long in rooms where listening was strategic, where people waited for the pause that would let them speak, that sitting across from someone who was genuinely, unhurriedly present felt like taking off a weight she hadn't noticed carrying. He didn't care about her title. Not in the way some men didn't care the ones who made a point of their indifference as a kind of posturing. He simply didn't structure their conversations around it. He asked about her work the way he might ask about any work, with mild, genuine curiosity and no particular awe. She had loved him for that. She hadn't said it out loud, but she had. The first fracture came slowly, the way fractures always do, not a single break, but a series of small pressures accumulating over months. She was promoted. Senior VP first, then, 6 months later, interim CEO when the previous one left under circumstances the board described as mutual separation and the rest of the firm understood as a controlled detonation. Her salary doubled. Her schedule compressed into something nearly inhuman. Her world always demanding became total. And the people around her had opinions. Her board liaison, a man named Gerald Forsyth, who wore the same 4 ties on rotation, said nothing directly. He didn't have to. It was in the pause, when she mentioned Nathan's name, the almost imperceptible recalibration. Her college friend Diana, whom she trusted and should have listened to less, said it more plainly over drinks one evening. "Victoria, you're about to become one of the most powerful women in this industry. You understand what that means for who you're seen with, right?" She had not answered Diana, but she had heard it, and she had let it in. That was the part she would spend years unable to forgive herself for. The last 3 months of them together had the quality of a slow erosion. Not dramatic. Worse than dramatic, quiet, incremental. The kind of damage that doesn't reveal itself until the structure is already compromised. She started arriving later to his house on Sundays. Then canceling. "Work," she said. He understood work. He didn't push. She stopped mentioning him in conversations where it would have been natural to do so. A small omission. Then a habitual one. There was a gallery opening, a firm event, important attendance, press present, and she had not invited him. Told herself it would bore him. Knew, even as she told herself this, that it was something else entirely. He never said anything about it. That was its own kind of pain. The moment she had returned to most often in the years since happened on a Friday evening at a client dinner, a table of 7 at a restaurant, not unlike the one she stood in now. Nathan had come to pick her up afterward. They'd had plans for a late drink. He had waited in the lobby. One of her clients, a man named Douglas Whitmore who wore his money like weather, had passed through the lobby on his way out, seen Nathan standing there in his jacket, and looked at him with the particular blankness of someone who has decided a person is not worth the effort of an expression. Nathan had not noticed. Or had noticed, and chosen not to register it. Victoria had noticed. And she had felt she was ashamed of this, still a flash of something she did not want to name. A wish that the lobby were larger. That they were somewhere else. She had buried it immediately. But it had been there. The conversation that ended them was a Tuesday. Not a special Tuesday. Just an evening when Lily was at her grandmother's, and they were sitting in his kitchen, and the quiet between them had changed texture from comfortable to uncertain. He said, "Are you still happy when you're here?" Such a simple question. She had looked at him across the table, his face open. No accusation in it. Just that steady, watchful honesty that had always undone her. And she had not known how to answer. Not because the answer was no, because the answer was yes, but I'm terrified of what that means. And she had never learned to say things like that out loud. She said, "I think we want different things." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Do we?" She didn't answer. "Or are you afraid of what happens if we want the same thing?" That hit somewhere vital. She had stood up. She had gathered herself the way she gathered herself in boardrooms, in negotiations, in every arena where composure was the only currency that mattered, and she had said, from somewhere behind glass, "We're from different worlds, Nathan." I think we both knew this was temporary. The word temporary landed between them like something broken. He didn't argue. That was the thing about Nathan. He never argued, when argument would have been easier than acceptance. He simply looked at her with something that wasn't anger and wasn't grief exactly, but was worse than both, and he said, very quietly, "Okay." She was in the hallway, coat in hand, when Lily's voice came from the top of the stairs. She had come home early. She was 8 years old, and she was standing at the top of the stairs in her pajamas with the blue elephants on them, and her face had the specific expression of a child who has understood from the atmosphere of a room that something is wrong without being told what. "Are you leaving?" Lily asked. Her voice was careful, the way children's voices get when they are trying not to sound like what they feel. "Are you coming back?" Victoria had looked up at her. She had not answered. She had walked out. She had made it to her car before she started crying, and she had sat in the dark for a long time before she was able to drive. The career that followed was, by every measurable standard, extraordinary. She was confirmed as CEO 11 months after the interim appointment. The Forbes profile ran the following spring. The firm's revenue under her leadership grew 40% in the first 2 years. She opened the London office, then Frankfurt. She spoke at Davos. She was on 3 different most powerful women lists, which she had stopped reading because the gap between the lists and the reality of her Tuesday mornings was something she preferred not to examine. Men asked her to dinner. Some of them were intelligent. Some of them were kind. 1 or 2 of them, she thought, might have been genuinely good for her if she had been someone else in a different configuration. She tried, twice, with effort she considered sincere at the time. Both times, she found herself sitting across the table and feeling the stone behind her sternum, that specific, familiar weight and knowing. No one made her feel quiet. That was the only way she could describe it to herself. Nathan had made her feel quiet. Not silenced, never silenced. Quiet, the way a room feels when the noise has stopped and what's left is only what was real. She had not found that again. She was not sure she had looked. What she did not know, during those years, was the parallel life unfolding across the city. Nathan had kept the garage, expanded it, actually a second bay, a small waiting area with decent coffee, and a wall his daughter had painted a mural on, a Saturday morning appointment system that drew more business than walk-ins. He had 3 employees now. The work was good, steady. The kind of work that left him tired in his body but not in his mind, which he had come to understand was what he needed. Lily was 13 now, tall for her age, still serious, still drawing not horses and cities anymore but large ambitious canvases she set up in the garage on weekends, the smell of turpentine, mixing with motor oil in a combination Nathan had stopped noticing and had come to love. She had her mother's eyes and her grandmother's stubbornness and some third thing that was entirely her own. She had asked about Victoria once, when she was 10. Only once. He had answered carefully. "She was someone very important to me. We wanted different things." Lily had considered this with the forensic patience she applied to everything. "Did you?" He had looked at his daughter. "What? Want different things? Did you actually? Or did you just decide that for each other?" He hadn't answered that one. His sister Renee had come home from 3 years abroad the week before the evening at the restaurant. She was 31, brighter than anyone Nathan knew, and entirely too perceptive for his comfort. She had arrived with 2 suitcases and an immediate inventory of everything she felt he had gotten wrong in her absence. "You need to date someone," she had said on the second morning, over coffee, with the bluntness of someone who has been away long enough to skip the re-entry pleasantries. "Good morning to you too. I'm serious. You've been alone for 5 years. I have Lily. Lily is your daughter. She's wonderful." "She doesn't count." He had looked at his coffee. "Some people, you only love once." Renee had been quiet for a moment. Then, "She's not dead, Nathan. She's just someone who made a bad decision." He didn't say anything. "And bad decisions," Renee said, with the gentleness that lived underneath her directness, "can be unmade." Back to now. Back to the warm amber of Ardoise, the 47th floor, the city arranged below the windows like something decorative. Victoria stood at the edge of the dining room and watched Nathan lean back in his chair and say something that made the woman across from him cover her mouth, laughing a real laugh, the kind that involves the whole face, and something in Victoria's chest performed a complicated movement she was not prepared for. She should go, find Cassandra, approve the statement, have the car brought around. Tomorrow, there was a 7 a.m. call with the Frankfurt team and a board presentation she had reviewed 4 times, and a lunch she had already rescheduled twice. She should go. She watched the woman reach across the table and touch Nathan's arm in that easy, familiar way. She did not go. Her mind ran the calculus she had been refusing to run for 5 years. He had moved on. Of course he had. He was kind and decent and good. And the world was not so punishing that someone like Nathan Calloway stayed alone for 5 years over someone who had chosen wrong and walked out. She had no right to feel what she was feeling. She felt it anyway. She watched him lift his glass and glance briefly toward the entrance, the casual sweep of someone checking the room, and then she was caught. His eyes found her. The room did not stop. The conversations around her continued. The clink of glasses, the murmur of business being done in the language of social occasions. But something in the visible space between them changed quality, became charged, became still, and Nathan Calloway looked at her across the restaurant with an expression she couldn't read from this distance, and she was surprised to find she was already walking. She hadn't decided to walk. She was walking. She crossed the dining room with the composure she wore like a second skeleton, shoulders level. Pace measured, but her heart was doing something entirely outside of professional regulation. She stopped at the edge of his table. Up close, he looked more like himself than he had from across the room. The silver in his hair, the particular set of his jaw. He had a small scar above his left eyebrow. She had forgotten existed until this moment. And the forgetting and the remembering happened simultaneously and cost her something. The woman across from him looked up, bright eyes, curious, not threatened. Nathan said, very quietly, "Victoria," just her name. The way he had always said it, not Miss Harmon, never that, just Victoria. 2 syllables that somehow contained an entire history. She had rehearsed nothing. There was no version of this in any of the mental architectures she had built for managing difficult situations. She said the only thing that was true. "I missed you." The words came out smaller than she intended, more exposed. She felt the color in her face and could do nothing about it. The woman across the table looked at Nathan. And then she began to laugh. It was not a cruel laugh. It was the laugh of someone who has just watched something fall exactly into place. "Oh," the woman said, still laughing, pressing a hand to her mouth the same way she had a moment ago. "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm Renee." She extended her hand across the table. His sister. "I literally just flew in from Amsterdam 6 days ago." The word sister moved through Victoria like warm water. She shook Renee's hand. She was aware she was still standing. She was aware that her face had done something entirely beyond her professional capacity to control. "Sit down," Nathan said quietly. "Please." She sat. For a moment, nobody said anything. Renee looked between them with the expression of someone watching a very good film at an interesting juncture. "I'll get dessert menus," Renee said, standing with an agility that suggested she had been waiting for an excuse to do this. "From the bar." "It'll take a while. The bar is very far away." She picked up her purse, gave Victoria a look of such direct, kind assessment that Victoria felt briefly transparent, and left. Victoria looked at the tablecloth. Then at Nathan. He was looking at her, not with anger. She had braced for anger, had spent the 30 seconds of walking across the restaurant inventorying all the things she deserved from him, and anger was at the top of the list. Instead, his expression had the quality she had forgotten. That particular, unhurried steadiness. Like someone who had decided, a long time ago. That composure was a form of respect. "You look well," he said. "You don't have to say that. I'm not being polite. You look well." A pause. "Tired, though." She almost laughed. "That's more accurate," Renee had told him. She understood that immediately. In the way of a conversation that is already part way through, he knew about the firm, the growth, the profiles. Or had seen them himself. It had been 5 years. The world was small in its way. And Victoria Harmon's name was not obscure. She said, "I thought you were. I know what you thought." The honesty of it stopped her. No softening. Not unkind, just direct in the way he had always been. The way she had always found both disarming and clarifying. "I'm sorry," she said. I know that's not enough. I know there isn't a version of sorry that makes the way I left." "Victoria." She stopped. He folded his hands on the table, the gesture she remembered, patient, considered, and said, "I know." That was all. And somehow, it was everything. She felt something in her chest give way. Not dramatically, not the cinematic collapse she had always privately feared. The one that would prove she was less in control than she appeared. Quietly, the way ice gives way in spring, more process than event, the result of a long, slow warmth working from below. Her eyes were burning. She was not going to cry in Ardoise on a Tuesday evening in front of Nathan Calloway, and the very far-away bar where Renee was almost certainly watching this from a discreet distance. She blinked twice. It didn't help. She kept the book, Nathan said. What? Lily. The book you gave her. The one about the girl who builds the flying machine. He glanced at the table. She read it so many times the spine broke. She taped it. The burning intensified. She's 13 now, he said. She'd probably act cool about seeing you. She'd be lying. She talks about you. Victoria pressed her fingers to the base of her throat, a gesture she was not conscious of making, and looked at the ceiling once, briefly, as a measure of last resort. Don't, she said, though she wasn't sure what she was asking him not to do. He handed her a napkin. She had not seen him pick it up. It was simply there. In the same unhurried way he had always had of appearing with exactly what was needed before the need had been announced. She took it. Renee returned 15 minutes later, announced the dessert menu with more theatrical enthusiasm than was warranted, and then said she had suddenly remembered a very important call she had to make from the lobby. The call would take an hour, possibly longer. Possibly she would walk home. The weather was nice. She was always like that, Nathan said, when she was gone. I like her. Most people do. It's a little humbling. They ordered coffee. It was nearing 10 o'clock. The restaurant had quieted. The business dinners had concluded. The remaining tables occupied by people who were staying because they wanted to be there, not because obligation required it. I didn't defend you, Victoria said. He looked at her. At the Whitmore dinner. When Douglas Whitmore, he saw you in the lobby, and he looked through you like you weren't there. And I. She stopped. I didn't say anything. I just let it happen, and I knew what I was doing. I knew it was a choice. The silence held for a moment. I know, Nathan said. I knew too, and you didn't say anything. What would I have said? I wasn't going to argue you into respecting me. That's not how it works. He looked at his coffee. And I knew it wasn't about not respecting me. You did. I could feel it. It was something else. Fear, she said. The word came out clean, like something that had been waiting for a long time to be spoken without its wrapping. I was afraid of what it would mean to choose something real over something safe, over something legible. My life was legible, Nathan. I could explain it. I could justify every part of it in professional language. She paused. You weren't legible in that language, and instead of learning a new one, I left. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. The city was laid out beyond the windows like scattered light. The hardest part, he said finally, wasn't the leaving. I'd been left before. I knew what that felt like. She waited. It was the he stopped. The way you looked in the lobby. When Whitmore walked past, that second before you recovered. He looked at her directly. I saw you wish I was somewhere else, and I understood it. I knew exactly why it happened, and I wasn't even angry about it. His voice was level, careful. But that's what stayed with me. Not the leaving. That moment. She did not look away. It would have been easier to look away. That's the thing I owe you the most for, she said. Not the apology. The staying. Staying long enough to let me see myself clearly. A pause. I didn't do anything useful with it at the time, but I didn't forget it either. He looked at her for a long moment. The quiet was different now, not heavy, not empty. Something else. The kind of quiet that happens after the thing that needed to be said has finally been said, and the room is making space for what comes next. I never hated you, he said. I want you to know that. There were days I was angry. There were days I missed you so badly I couldn't. He stopped. Looked at his coffee. But I never hated you. I didn't have it in me. She pressed her fingertips against the edge of the table and looked at him. Really looked. The way you can only do when you've decided to stop managing how you look while you're looking, and said, I know. That's the part I least deserved. Something almost like a smile moved across his face. Not quite. But close. Renee's going to be very smug about this, he said. Victoria laughed. It surprised her the genuine, uncalculated quality of it. She's earned it. Please don't tell her that. Her ego is already a structural concern. They didn't rush. That was what she noticed over the weeks that followed. Neither of them rushed. There was a coffee, the Thursday after the restaurant, at a place he knew near the garage, not small and unglamorous, like the place where they'd met, but unpretentious in the way that felt intentional rather than indifferent. They talked for 2 hours and 20 minutes, which she knew because she'd had to reschedule a call and had checked the time twice. And it had not felt like 2 hours and 20 minutes. There was a Sunday afternoon walk. There were text messages, nothing frequent, nothing urgent, the kind of correspondence that had the texture of something being built carefully rather than something being demanded. She was aware, the whole time, of the fear operating just beneath the surface of everything. She thought about it in the mornings, in the particular clarity of 5 a.m., when the apartment was dark and her coffee was the only warm thing. You are going to hurt him again. It was not a small concern. She had proven something about herself 5 years ago, a specific, documented failure of character, and the fact that she understood it now did not guarantee she would not reproduce it. She said this to Nathan, the third time they met, with a directness that surprised even her. I need you to know that I'm afraid of myself in this, of what I've already shown myself capable of. He had considered this for a moment. I know, that's not reassuring. I'm not trying to reassure you. I'm saying I know, and I'm here anyway. Those are different things. She had sat with that. He had his own fear, she understood. It was quieter than hers. He didn't announce it, didn't narrate it, but she could feel it in the occasional pause before he reached for her arm, or the moment when she would suggest something future-facing and watch him not quite respond immediately. He had been left. He knew what it cost. He was choosing, deliberately, and with full information, to be here, and that choice was visible in its carefulness. Lily was the piece she hadn't prepared for. She had been imagining a teenager in the abstract, distant, distracted by her own concerns, requiring nothing of Victoria except a polite surface. The Lily she met on a Saturday afternoon at the garage was entirely other. She was tall and serious-faced in the way children sometimes are when they've been trusted with adult-sized understanding early, and she looked at Victoria with a long, considering assessment that reminded her so precisely of Nathan that it was briefly disorienting. Then Lily had said, I still have the book. Victoria had said, I know. Your dad told me. I taped the spine because it kept coming apart. That's what you do with things worth keeping. Lily had looked at her for another moment. Then she had gone back to the canvas she was working on, which occupied the back half of the second garage bay and appeared to involve an ocean and something that might have been a lighthouse or possibly a tower. Nathan had watched this exchange from beside the coffee maker with an expression Victoria could not quite read but did not need to. The pressure from the board came 3 weeks later. It was delivered through Gerald Forsyth, which was how the board always delivered the things it didn't want to attach names to directly. Gerald had appeared in her office doorway on a Thursday morning, the same 4-tie rotation, the same pause that preceded everything important, and had said that the Castlewood merger was moving into its final phase, and that the family had expressed strong interest in a closer alignment with Harmon and Cole's leadership, and that Jeffrey Castlewood, 39, family heir, recently separated, had specifically mentioned admiring her. She had let Gerald finish. Then she had said, Tell the Castlewood family I appreciate their confidence in the firm. Victoria. And tell Jeffrey that I'm not available. Gerald had left with the expression of someone who will need to make several phone calls. The story moved, the way these things do not through any official channel but through the particular osmosis of an industry where everyone knows everyone, and not everything is said aloud. By the following week, there were questions. Nothing explicit in the press, but the kind of interested silence that precedes something. And Victoria's publicist had sent 3 messages asking to talk. She was sitting in her car outside the garage on a Saturday evening when she finally understood that the old fear had not returned. She waited for it, sat in the quiet of the car, and actively listened for the voice that had once told her the shape of her life required a different man, and it wasn't there. What was there, instead, was something she could only describe as orientation. She knew where she was pointing. The board meeting was a Monday. Her board meetings were always Monday mornings. A structural fact she had established early in her tenure because it forced the week to begin with accountability. 16 people around a mahogany table. She knew each of them, their biases, their interests, the precise latitude of their loyalty. She had run these people, and these people had run her. For 6 years. She understood the game. Gerald Forsyth opened the Castlewood alignment discussion at item 7 on the agenda, with the careful language of someone who has been briefed on exactly how much he can say. Victoria waited until he had finished. Then she said, "I'm going to be direct with this, because that's what this group deserves." The room stilled. The suggestion that my personal life should be structured around a business interest is one I understand the logic of. I've operated in this industry long enough to know it's not an unusual calculation. She looked around the table. It's also one I'm declining. Not because I don't value the Castlewood merger, I do, and we're going to close it on the terms we've already negotiated, which are excellent. But the merger doesn't need my marriage. It needs the work we've already put in. A pause. If the board believes differently, I'd welcome that conversation explicitly. On the record. Silence. Then the board chair Margaret Ellison, 63, who had backed Victoria's initial appointment against 3 dissenting voices, said, "Item 8. That was all." The room moved forward. Outside the window afterward, the city was doing what it always did, moving, indifferent, the ordinary, extraordinary machinery of 10 million lives, and Victoria stood at the glass with her coffee and felt something she identified, after a moment, as peace, not victory. Peace, which was different. Quieter. Less contingent. Her phone was in her hand before she'd made a conscious decision to reach for it. She texted Nathan. "Are you at the garage?" His response came in 90 seconds. "Yes, come over if you want." She considered the "if you want" the particular careful generosity of it, the refusal to assume or demand, and felt the orientation settle into something more certain. She drove herself. She did not call the car. The garage on a Monday afternoon had a specific quality she had forgotten. The smell of oil and metal and something clean underneath it. The sound of a radio playing something instrumental in the second bay. The light falling through the open doors in long November rectangles. Lily was at school. One of his employees, a young man named Derek, with paint-stained work gloves, looked up from under a sedan hood, registered her, and went back to work with the discretion of someone who has been briefed. Nathan was at the back, writing something on a work order. He looked up when she came in. She said, "I told the board no." He set down the pen. "No to what?" "To a marriage of convenience they were suggesting I consider." With a client's air. She looked at him. "It's a longer story. But that's the relevant part." He was quiet for a moment. "You didn't have to." "I know I didn't have to. That's not why I did it." She took a step toward him. 5 years ago I stood in a hallway and made a choice that I've been paying for in one way or another every single day since, not because the career wasn't real or didn't matter. It was. It does. She stopped when she was close enough that the conversation no longer needed to be projected, but I made the choice from fear, and I dressed it up as logic, and I'm done doing that. He looked at her for a long moment. The stillness she had always known in him. Not passive, not empty, but a deliberate, chosen quality was there in full. "Last time," he said quietly, "you said we were from different worlds." "I know. Are we?" She thought about it. Really thought, not the version of consideration that was actually retrieval of a prepared answer, but the genuine kind. "No," she said. "I think I just convinced myself we were because it was easier than being brave." Something shifted in his face. He crossed the remaining distance between them and put his arms around her. And she stood in the smell of oil and winter light and felt herself go quiet, that specific, particular quiet for the first time in 5 years. 1 year later, not in headlines, not in any of the professional language she had spent her career becoming fluent in. Just a year. The garage had expanded again. Nathan had taken the adjacent property, knocked through, added a proper waiting room with decent chairs and Lily's latest canvas on the wall, a large dark painting of a city at night with small lights in every window that Victoria had first seen in the middle of its making and had sat in front of for a long time without speaking. "What do you see?" Lily had asked. She was 14 now, and the solemnity had taken on a new quality: less defense, more architecture. The seriousness of someone who was beginning to understand that it was a gift rather than a symptom. People, Victoria had said. Alone, but near each other. Lily had considered this. Yeah, she said. That's what I was trying to do. Harmon and Cole had closed the Castlewood merger without incident in February, on the terms Victoria had negotiated, without the marriage. Jeffrey Castlewood had pivoted to interest in a media company based in Toronto, and the board had moved on with the pragmatism of people whose primary loyalty is to the bottom line. Margaret Ellison had said nothing about it, which was her way of approving. Victoria's life had not simplified. That was the thing she wanted to be honest about. Even inside her own accounting of it, she still had early mornings and late conference calls, and the grinding, sometimes exhilarating complexity of running something significant. She still had the 3 a.m. ceiling on the bad nights. But the apartment had changed. Not in its architecture, still glass and steel. Still the 41st floor, but in its feel. There were shoes near the door that weren't hers. There was a particular brand of coffee in the kitchen, because Nathan had strong feelings about coffee, which she had not previously known, and now considered an essential fact. There were drawings pinned to the refrigerator. Lily left them, occasionally, the way teenagers leave evidence of their presence when they're paying more attention than they're letting on. On a Sunday, in late autumn, they went back to Ardoise. She had suggested it, and immediately wondered if it was too much, too pointed, too architected. He had said, "Sure." I never finished the dessert menu that night anyway. Renee came, because Renee had become a fixture of Sunday evenings in ways that were entirely her own doing, and which Victoria had stopped resisting. Lily came, wearing a jacket she had clearly chosen with some care, and was equally clearly pretending she hadn't. The maitre seated them at a window table. The city below was the city it always was: lit, indifferent, astonishing. Partway through the meal, Nathan reached across the table and took her hand. Not quietly. Not hidden under the tablecloth. Just. Hand on the table. Turned upward. An offering, and an anchor at once. She looked at it for a moment. Then she put her hand in his. Renee said something that made Lily roll her eyes. The waiter arrived with a bread basket. The conversation went somewhere ordinary and warm, the way conversations do when the people having them have stopped performing and started talking. Victoria looked out at the city, the scattered light of 10 million lives happening simultaneously, each one its own entire universe, each one containing losses and recoveries, and the long, slow work of becoming someone better than you were, and thought about nothing in particular. She was quiet, not the silence of absence. Not the silence of the 41st floor in the small hours. The stone behind the sternum. The proof of everything she had chosen not to have. This was the other kind, the kind that comes when you are exactly where you are supposed to be. Sitting next to the person who makes the noise stop. And the thing you are feeling has no name that improves on the feeling itself. She had spent a long time believing that power was the thing that made you safe. She understood now that she had been measuring the wrong thing entirely. Safety, the real kind, the kind that held, was not a position. It was not a title or an office or a table at the right restaurant or a name on a list of powerful women. It was a corner table and a man who handed you a napkin before you asked. And a 14-year-old who taped a broken spine because she understood that some things are worth keeping, and a Sunday evening with no agenda. It was this. She had almost decided it wasn't enough. She was grateful, in the wordless way of things that cannot quite be said, that she had been wrong. The city kept its lights on. The table stayed warm, and somewhere below, the ordinary world moved forward carrying, as it always does, everything that matters most.